The unexamined life is not worth living, so know thyself. Hey, welcome to Park Notes. I'm Parker Settecase. I'm a graduate student in philosophy, and this is a channel where I help you study and think more deeply. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to philosophical soliloquies, a tool used by ancient philosophers to get to know themselves better, to know what they believe and why they believe it. So I'm going to show you how I keep my own book of soliloquies, and then I'll give you some ideas for how you can keep your own book of soliloquies in order to know thyself, in order to live an examined life. So let's jump right in. So soliloquies are an amazing way to help you know thyself. Now, know thyself is a very famous philosophical maxim which was inscribed upon the temple of Apollo in the ancient Greek precinct of Delphi. Now, in the temple of Delphi was a high priestess named Pythia. She's also known as the Oracle of Delphi, and she's the one who told one of Socrates' friends that he was the wisest man in all of Athens. This friend then went and told Socrates, and he didn't believe it. So he went out to inspect all the other wise men in all of Athens and other places in the world to see if this oracle from the oracle was true. And we have this recounted for us in Plato's Dialogues. So Socrates set out to test this oracle by examining himself, by examining others, and by examining life's deepest questions, life's deep philosophical worldview questions like justice and goodness and beauty. Now, if you've ever read Plato's Dialogues, Socrates is the main character, and he doesn't often come to any conclusion. Usually the conclusion is, these wise men aren't as wise as they thought. And no one really knows anything except Socrates may be the wisest man because at least he knows he doesn't know anything. But there is one major conclusion which Socrates came to, and that is that the unexamined life is not worth living. According to Plato, he mentioned this in his apology, in his defense, before he was forced to drink hemlock and died. So how do we live a life that's worth living? Well, we get to know ourselves. We examine the life that we're living as we're living it. How do we do that? Well, one of the best ways is soliloquies. So Socrates drinks the hemlock in 399 BC. Plato writes his apology where he recounts the death of Socrates. And then Plato goes on to write many more dialogues where Socrates is his mouthpiece, and it's unclear whether or not the philosophy of Socrates is present in the dialogues or whether Plato is doing some constructive work and adding in his own philosophical musings. So fast forward a bit to 386 AD when St. Augustine becomes a Christian and then goes on to write his own soliloquies. It looks like soliloquy is a word that Augustine coined himself. It comes from two Latin words, solus, meaning alone, and loci or loqui, meaning speak, so speak alone. And a soliloquy is just the act of talking to oneself or the act of speaking alone. This word is also used in drama to refer to a solo utterance of an actor. The most famous being Shakespeare's Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. So that's a soliloquy as well. What I'm talking about in this video, in order to know yourself, is a philosophical soliloquy, a philosophical dialogue with yourself, a philosophical monologue where you are your own audience. So while the priests and priestesses of Apollo, including the Oracle of Delphi, encouraged their followers to know thyself, St. Augustine coined this term soliloquy to capture his process of knowing God and knowing the soul. He's giving a philosophical dialogue between his own thoughts and reason. But reason just represents his own reason. So it's a dialogue, but it's a monologue. He's talking with himself. This book is actually two books, and in the first book, he starts out after his prayer by saying, I want to know God and the soul. And then reason asks him, nothing more? And Augustine says, nothing whatsoever. So Augustine takes this a step further. Know thyself and know God. Know God, know thyself. Now, Boethius also does something similar to this in the Consolation of Philosophy, but instead of talking to reason, he's talking to Lady Philosophy, but she's functioning in a similar way. So if you want to see how these philosophers have used soliloquies to get clear on their own ideas and to gain self-knowledge, definitely check out Boethius, the Consolation of Philosophy, where he's consoling himself through philosophy while he's in jail as a political prisoner. And check out St. Augustine's Soliloquies, which is two books in one, where he explores the existence of the soul, immateriality of the soul, immortality of the soul, kind of gets into knowledge of God, but more from a philosophical perspective because he's a young Christian. But check these out. Also check out Plato and his dialogues, which are functioning kind of like a soliloquy. It's hard to determine how much of this was historically accurate and how much was a construction by Plato. But if you grab this Penguin Classic edition of The Last Days of Socrates by Plato, then you can grab the Apology of Socrates and find that famous quote for yourself, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Also check out St. Augustine's Confessions, which also function like a soliloquy, but is actually a prayer to God. This is, one of the best books in the Western canon. Even if you're not religious, he comes up with a linear theory of time, whereas most ancients thought of time as being cyclical. He said, no, it's linear. And then he says, what is time? I know what it is until you ask me about it. It's amazing. Chock full of super good quotes and wisdom. If you guys want to pick up any of these books, then check the links in the description. Those are my affiliate links. So if you buy them through there, you will support this channel. That would be huge. But enough about books. Let's get into how you can keep a book of soliloquies in order to know yourself better. So this is a Murdy Creative Co. leather journal. It's a leather cover on a medium moleskin journal. I love Murdy Creative. These are some of the coolest leather notebooks out there. They have these 3 cool clasps. You put them together and a nice Parker pen locks all 3 together. I love these. So this is my book of soliloquies. I also use a metric cut Murdy Creative with a Leuchtturm 1917 A5 for another deep thinking philosophy journal. I use the same in a different color. This is in bourbon for my Philosophy of AI Commonplace book. And I have a Murdy Creative pocket notebook with a moleskin pocket inside. So right now, Murdy Creative and I are teaming up to bring my audience 10% off their entire order. I'm really excited about this. All you have to do is go to murdycreative.co/Parker Notes in all caps, browse their whole catalog, buy a bunch of stuff, and then when you're in the checkout, use code Parker Notes, all caps, to get 10% off your entire order. This is huge. I love it. Make sure to use that link so Murdy Creative knows that I sent you, and make sure to use promo code Parker Notes in all caps to get 10% off your entire order. That's crazy. I'm so excited about this. So back to the nitty gritty of keeping a book of soliloquies. Super hard to say that word, soliloquies. I think there are at least 2 different ways to keep this book. One way is to use it as a monologue directed at yourself. I do this a lot. I'm writing kind of to myself, hey, why are you like this? Why do you like this? Why do you like that? Why are you like this? So a lot of times I will give it a title. I'll box out the title so I know that this entry is all about this topic. Sometimes it'll be a question. Sometimes it's just a title. Strength and competence. Curiosity as the lifeblood of the mind. Luddite techno-philosopher. Recursive thoughts in the image of God. Artificial intelligence will make us all less intelligent. Mentorship and fatherhood, what's the connection there? Why do I love villains? A 10-year reflection, that one's pretty small, but pride and confidence. So this represents the first way to keep a book of soliloquies. A monologue addressed to yourself. You think through as you go, why am I like this? Why do I like the things that I like? Why do I enjoy these kinds of things? Help yourself figure yourself out. Most of my books and commonplace books and diaries and notebooks and pocket notebooks all start, back in 2013. But this is a newer process for me. I started this back in 2021 with the entry, Why Do I Love Villains? And I was thinking through, why do I like Anthony Hopkins' character in Westworld, or Moriarty from the Game of Shadows particularly? I genuinely wanted to know, why is there something wrong with me that I like villains so much more? Not just raw evil villains, but the really crafty ones like Palpatine from Star Wars. And so I try to think through, what's the deal? Is it because we are better acquainted with craftiness than with wholesome goodness? Or does that have to be boring? Is it just me who feels this, or are there other people who also resonate with this? So I want to get to know myself. So I write these monologues and I address them to myself. I also got really obsessed with Thanos versus Darkseid. Why? Who cares about that? Why do I care so much? What is it about me that makes this question so compelling? Also, what's the relationship between a philosopher and a theologian? How do these two differ? Are they the same thing? Probably not. I've gotten master's degrees in both, so I should be able to figure this stuff out. So I'm trying. Why do I want to pursue these 2 academic disciplines? The philosopher and the sage. Are those 2 the same things? Because modern philosophers aren't like wisdom lovers in the same way you think of a sage. So what's up? Why do I like a cyberpunk aesthetic and a Hobbiton aesthetic. Can I fuse those together or not? So what's up? I want to get to know myself. A second way to get to know yourself through soliloquies would be doing what Augustine did, doing what Boethius did, and actually writing up a fake dialogue between you and another character, between you and your reason, or between you and Lady Philosophy or Lady Wisdom, and having them be literally the voice of reason that you're debating with, that you're arguing with, that you're dialoguing with. Now, I've done a few of these myself in dialogue format, and I published them on my old blog, Parker's Pensies, but I couldn't find the physical, notes for them. So if you want to keep a book of soliloquies, there's 2 different ways you can do it, and you can alternate them in the same notebook. So let's say you go and get a Murdy Creative notebook with the Parker Notes discount, 10% off. Let's say you go and do that. How would you go about keeping a book of soliloquies? Well, you can write monologues to yourself, or you can write dialogues with yourself. They're both soliloquies, and they both will aid you in knowing yourself. Now you might be asking, what kind of questions should I be asking myself? Well, I think there's at least 2 categories of questions that you can ask yourself. One is worldview type questions, and the other is subjective personal questions. So the worldview questions are going to be like, God, does God exist? If he did exist, would that make any difference? I exist without my own consent. Could God snuff himself out? What do I think about that? What would God be like if he did exist? Why do I think God doesn't exist? Why do I think God does exist? And reason through these God questions. What's the nature of reality? Why is there something rather than nothing? Super basic but ultimate and foundational question. What's the nature of reality? Do I have a soul? Will I survive the death of my body? What is knowledge and what kind of things do I know? What is truth and goodness and beauty and the American way? No. What are these things and how do I know? What do I think about them and why? So I'm calling these worldview type questions. These are questions that all of us ask and we should all have answers to. So get to know yourself. What do you believe and why do you believe it? This will differ from my Deep Thinking Philosophy journal. If you guys want to know about that, you can find the link somewhere up here, or in the description. There, I'm examining ideas and I'm arguing for and against, and I'm trying to build a case. Here, I'm trying to figure out what do I believe and why do I believe that? So I'm going to give some reasons, but this is somewhere between a journal and a diary. A journal being a collection of thoughts and a diary being a collection of time-bound feelings. So the first set of questions you can ask are worldview questions. The second are subjective personal questions. So this would be like my Darkseid versus Thanos. This would be my why do I love villains? What kind of man do I want to be? Why do I love the philosophy of technology, but I'm not very good at technology myself? Those kind of questions to get to know yourself. So it's important to know what you believe and why you believe it, but it's also important to know the kind of person that you are. What are your views on X, Y, or Z? So boom, I hope that's been helpful. And again, please go check out Murdy Creative so that they know a partnership with me is worthwhile. This stuff is super duper cool. You're going to love it.